the Bane Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, Ghosts of Christmas Future manifest and advises those who haven't got a halfpenny to use the 9/10 of their brain that they don't use to imagine a Klein's bottle swallowing a Mobius strip, which will send you back in time where you can steal a halfpenny of a nonplussed English squire. Plus, we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Uncompromising Honor. All right now. Welcome to the Bane Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Bane Senior Editor Tony Daniel. We continue our interview with DJ Butler this time, talking about Serpent Daughter, his new book in the Witchy Wars series. This is Dave Butler's cool alternative 1830s, 1840s America, where magic works and the continent is divided into kingdoms. There's an emperor in the east allied with the necromancer Oliver Cromwell. And our heroine, Sarah, is now a queen sitting upon the serpent throne in the kingdom of Cahokia, where there's lots of magic and elf-like beings and strange man-beasts. And the emperor, well, he wants to conquer Cahokia, as does the animal god Heron King to the west of Sarah. It's really evocative, this book, adventurous, and it's really fun stuff. And Dave will tell us all about it soon. And we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Now here's the news. We are having another amazing ebook special for December. From now until the end of the year, there are discounts on all Michael Z. Williamson ebooks. That's right, it's the Williamson Holiday Mayhem ebook sale. It's a barrage of Christmas season savings on Michael Z. Williamson ebooks. This means $2 off the great Freehold series anthology, Freehold Resistance, edited by Michael Z. Williams, with stories by Larry Correia, Michael Z. Williamson, Brad R. Torgerson, Mike Massa, Casey Ezel, and lots of just a big lineup of great writers. And that book is $4.99 for an ebook that's regularly $6.99. Plus, through December, $1 off on all other Michael Z. Williamson ebooks, including everything in Mike's legendary Freehold series. Here are the gritty details. These discounts apply wherever Bane ebooks are sold, which includes the Bane website, Amazon, and all the other Bane distribution outlets. So join the mayhem and fill out your holidays with some great reading from Michael Z. Williamson. Can it be true? It is true. Ho, 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 happy holidays. The December hardcovers and new trade paperbacks are at booksellers everywhere. These include newest Liaden Universe novel, Trader's Leap by Sharon Lee and Steve Miller. Clan Corval saved Liaden civilization from insurrection within, and its reward has been relentless pursuit by enemies. The exiled clan leadership has sent Clan Corval master trader Sean Yosgalen to establish new trade routes. The sooner the better. Corval's very existence depends upon his success. Also out in December is The Founder Effect, edited by Robert E. Hampson and Sarah L. Medlock. 2185 CE, humans have conquered our solar system, and now the starship Victoria carries 10,000 colonists to a world beyond. They are the original actors upon the stage of a new world, will become the stuff of legend. For on any frontier, it is the pioneers who establish the residences that echo into the halls of the future they hope to build. Call it destiny. Call it the Founder Effect. Finally, out in December is Lost in Transmission by Will McCarthy. Brash and idealistic, they were rebels without a cause in a world governed by science, reason, and immortality. Banished for their troubles to the starship New Hope, they now face a bold future to settle the worlds of Barnard's Star. But this crew of rebels will find it as far from the paradise they seek, and worst of all, death itself has returned to humanity with a vengeance. Lost in Transmission by Will McCarthy. The Founder Effect, edited by Robert E. Hampson and Sarah L. Medlock, and Trader's Leap by Sharon Lee and Steve Miller are now available at booksellers everywhere, so merry, happy, jolly, jolly, jolly to you. This is part 2 of a 2-part interview with DJ Butler talking about Serpent Daughter. Part 1 is available on last week's podcast. Hey, I want to welcome DJ Butler, Dave Butler, back to the podcast. Hey, Dave.
Hey, Tony. Good to see you.
That is some hat. It is not the tricorder.
No, or the fedora that I started wearing for Hiram Woolley either, but I was wearing this back when Witchy Eye came out. I don't have a people-crowned kind of Grand Inquisitor hat. I haven't got one. This is the closest I've got. It's actually is leather, and I bought it on a business trip to Buenos Aires back in about 2004, I guess, and just sat around the house for 14 years. And then when I started wearing hats as kind of a, branding authorly shtick, I said, you know what, I should wear that hat. So.
So it looks kind of Jim Butchery, like his main character is a bit.
And his hat, although I think in the you say Jim Butchery, but I think you're really talking about the iconic covers, right? Because I think in the books the character isn't actually described as wearing a hat.
Yes, in the covers, yeah.
Yeah. So and it's got the sort of link to Witchy Eye, if there is one, is it's got a little fleur de lis on the head.
Maybe that's the Chevalier's hat.
That's right. It makes him one of the bad guys.
One of the bad guys. Well, let's talk about. All right, let me talk a little bit about Dave. DJ Butler grew up in swamps, deserts, and mountains. After messing around for years with the practice of law, he finally got serious and turned his lifelong passion of storytelling. He now writes adventure stories for readers of all ages, plays guitar, and spends as much time as he can with his family, which is a lot more this year, due to circumstances beyond our control.
Correct.
He is the author of Witchy Eye, Witchy Winter, Witchy Kingdom, which is the first 3 books in the Witchy Wars series, as well as co-author of Dust Bowl Magic Mystery Novels, which is just what I decided to call them this time. The Cunning Man and the Jupiter Knife. I don't know how you would characterize those books, but they're really cool.
That's a good characterization. I think technically the genre is occult detective, but that's a little bit of a smallish genre for most people. So I sometimes say they're that in the same way that Witchy Eye is the epic fantasy of the old weird America, that the Cunning Man is the urban fantasy of the old weird America.
Well, that makes sense. Well, now out at booksellers everywhere is the epic fantasy of Arcane America, Serpent Daughter by DJ Butler. So there's so you mentioned voodoo, and there's a lot of magic going on here that we're like, for instance, Oliver Cromwell's sorcery is necromancy.
Yeah.
And how does the magic work in the book? And particularly, you've borrowed from American traditions, I think, in a lot of ways. This is like a lot of different kind of magics here.
Yes. So some people within the stories practice magic at a kind of a high theoretical level. And they do it actually quoting Isaac Newton, but who they're really quoting is Sir James George Fraser in The Golden Bough. And it's an anthropologist kind of idea of magic, an idea which says, hey, magic is about rules of similarity and rules of contagion. And if you have the ability, if you have the gift, you can cause results in the physical world by assembling enough influences that are contagious to what you want, meaning things that have been in contact are always in contact. So if I want to cause harm to you, I can cause harm to something that was once in contact with you, or things that are similar to their target, or the thing they want to influence. Right. So these are two big ideas that you see them both in like a voodoo doll, right? If I want to injure somebody, I make a doll that looks like them, and I put their hair in the doll, and a scrap of cloth from their actual clothing. I make clothing for the doll, and then I can stab the doll, and my victim feels pain. So Sarah is one of those, but not everybody has that much talent. So yeah, I've tried to capture real sort of folk magic practices. A lot of those you see through, some of them you see through Etienne, for example, voodoo invocations of the Mystères of the Loa. But a lot of them you see through the perspective of this character Lumen Walters, who is basically an eclectic folk magician. He was never fit out for the plow. His father basically threw him off the farm somewhere in western Pennsylvania, upstate New York, somewhere when he was young. But so he's been a kind of thief of traditions. And there's backstory where he talks about his involvement in German Brauerei, which is a kind of a Christian German folk magic that is still practiced, right? Especially in kind of western Pennsylvania, characteristically. And so he tells us in his head. We see the couple pages of backstory where there's a blind Brauker, and he refuses to tell Lumen how his practice works, because his tradition is he only tells people within his own family. So Lumen goes and gets his niece, who doesn't actually care about this stuff at all, and pays her to sit there with her blind uncle and pretend she's learning, so Lumen can eavesdrop and gather together his practices. So Brauerei, for example, or stuff out of kind of the English cunning folk tradition, or I use the sort of Greco-Roman Neoplatonic magical papyri out of Egypt to be sort of move them a little bit in space and time as Memphite. The Memphite magical tradition, Memphis being the kingdom that is part of the empire and centered around Memphis.
And all that, everything that came through Freemasonry and their.
There's a lot of sort of Freemasonry and stuff like Freemasonry in the books as well, Yeah. So it's very gnarly. If you're looking for a setting that's very streamlined and everything follows one of 4 colors or one of 5 metals, this is not.
I said this before, that the book is like, what if everything that everybody thought was maybe magic and real in the 1800s was, and that would be your book. But so let's see. I was going to ask this, and spirits can inhabit bodies, and 2 or more can be in a body. Like, where's Oliver Cromwell, and what's he? And tell us about those partlet quints, because they're scary.
Yeah. I always lose track of how many there are. So by the beginning of book 4, there are 3 of them left. They show up in book 3, and they're quintuplets. And they're sort of featureless. Their heads are shaved. They're young men. We never learn exactly how young. But the Philadelphia Academy of Magic has basically said these guys, they only have one soul, despite having 5 bodies, and so they become a kind of device for communicating across. So they'll change their facial expressions and alter their voice and talk together, repeating what they're hearing at the other end of the connection. So when we see them, a few of them are brought out, and 3 are brought out to, notwithstanding Schmidt's siege of Cahokia in book 3, and 2 of them are left behind in Philadelphia. Some of them come to bad ends. So by the time we are in book three, there are three survivors, and one is going to go out west, and the telephone is connected to Simon Sword for reasons that cannot possibly be good. And then the other one is still with Schmidt, who was the director of the Imperial Ohio Company.
She, right? And she's kind of the main general of Thomas Penn, I would, or something like that.
Yeah,
and these twins, they're like a radio sort of for instantaneous communication, and they're under the control of the Emperor at the moment, at least.
Yeah, and one of them, by the time of book 4, is physically inhabited by Oliver Cromwell, more or less permanently. Yeah, so there's this telephone system that connects the bad guys as they're making a stronger alliance, and
Palantirs in a way, also.
Oh yes, but
it can work backwards and really mess with your mind, as Aragorn found out.
Yes.
But, one gets the feeling that Simon Sword knows more about magic than even Oliver Cromwell since he's been around forever. So.
Been around a long time,
yeah.
and he's intrinsically magical, right? Cromwell is really sort of a stand-in for science, in some ways, right? He, by art, wants to extend human life. That's basically who Cromwell is.
Yeah. So, and there's problems. All right. So Sarah's at Cahokia, and things start. And when things go bad with her, they go bad with Cahokia because she's intimately connected to this sort of serpent goddess. The thing is laid out like a serpent, right? That's the point of it.
Yeah, and this is an old idea. You find this in the Bible and in other old Hebrew texts, that a city, you see this throughout Isaiah, for example, where Isaiah addresses the city of Jerusalem as a woman, and so this is an old idea that the manifestation of cities was a woman, and Sarah is, in some sense, is the city. So when Simon Sword begins sending kind of earthquake attacks that rupture the city, it's also physically harming Sarah, who is already fragile. And so then, kind of working back the other way along the link, yes, if Sarah dies, what happens, right? What great direct catastrophe is gonna overtake the city? Spoilers, book 4. I won't say that.
Well, it's got problems within as well. There's the ladies of the 10 dance, who have always been a thorn in Sarah's side as well. They used to rule the place, right, or something like that. They're anyway. Go.
Yeah. So there's this. So this kind of pick up again the thread I was saying earlier, right? So as Sarah kind of comes to learn about this sort of goddess and her people, her father's people, who are to her all out, she's an outsider. She's raised more or less a New Light Christian in Nashville. The story is complicated, and you never hear an objective story. You hear the story from different people's point of view. But there is an old dispute that centers around Cahokia's goddess. And there are reformers, and one of her advisors is the metropolitan of Cahokia. Cahokia's sort of head Christian priest is a guy who's very much on the side of, hey, this is not a goddess; it's an ancient demon, and we have subdued it, and we should not now try to make an alliance with it or be its friend. Sarah nevertheless ascends the serpent throne and connects with the goddess, but it turns out that on the other side you have these priestesses, and they're sort of, the principal of them are the 7 ladies of tendance, and tendance is the service of waiting on the goddess, which is to say dressing her, washing her, anointing her, feeding her in her holy of holies. And so there's a 7-day week, and these 7 ladies, each of them with their sept, their followers, in turn waits on the goddess and the queen or king. who was enthroned. And some of these ladies of tendance, it turns out, have a vision of the goddess that kind of sounds a lot like the demon. So although in book 3, Sarah very much comes down on the side of I'm going to connect with the goddess, she then finds that some of these priestesses actually are pretty savage about blood sacrifice and kind of violent castration of male worshipers of this goddess. And they have some leverage because there are cult and magical secrets that they know that she does not. And because they have influence. So having kind of won the struggle against one side in book 3, in book 4, she's now struggling against the other side. And she's kind of working her way, trying to find what is more or less a middle ground between two sides of this theological war. But it's not abstract theology, right? Because it's a theology that is how she accesses the power that has saved and continues to save the kingdom.
Yeah. So, and we have some other. All right. So Sarah's saving Sarah from, and thus saving the kingdom from falling, is basically the big part of the book, Serpent Daughter. And it has to do with these other 6 kingdoms that have to somehow take part in a rite. So that's a big plot. There's some subplots that are very cool. Maybe talk a little bit about the Kathy Filmer, Bill Lee subplot, and Landon and all that. Because that was it was a touching subplot to me. I liked it a lot.
Yeah, I like writing that. I like I'll talk about the Calvin Calhoun subplot too, which I really find.
Mm-hmm. And there's Calvin, walking around.
So
and Calvin he was the one that was in love. He's kind of in love with Sarah, right? Yeah.
He is still in love with Sarah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's not lucky. He's not going to be lucky in that regard.
Well, he's competing against the Mississippi. So
it's a little rough. Yeah, let me talk about Kathy and Bill. So Bill was Bill's a pistolier, and he's a cavalier. He's a gentleman of the Chesapeake of North Carolina, although he would say John's Land. And there's
a great map in the book, by the way. So all of this a reader can always check back and see what it is that David has transformed. Anyway, go on. Yes,
I'm mostly pretty faithful to the real world geography, though I've made a couple of large changes and once in a while an egregious mistake. He was basically the head of the bodyguard corps of Sarah's father, and was present, not a participant, when Sarah's father was murdered. And when Hannah gave birth to 3 children, 3 sort of faithful friends took those children and hid them. And one of those faithful friends was Captain Sir William Johnston Lee, and he took the child, actually Nathaniel, the boy of the 3 children, and hid him in the household of the Earl of John's Land. And we first meet Captain Sir William Johnston Lee as Bad Bill, because what subsequently happens to Bill is he gets in a duel with the Earl's son. And kills him, the Earl's son Richard, and therefore he's exiled, and he flees to New Orleans, where for 15 years or so he makes a living as a gunfighter, as a thug, and that's the capacity we first meet him in. And Bill's a guy who is, like at his heart, what Bill needs is a flag to march under, right? He had one, and it's been taken away. And that's left him as this kind of rudderless thug, just knocking around, wishing for better days.
He's the kind of guy that really likes to be devoted to a cause or a person, and he will give his all for that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so he's actually very So he's basically faithful to his wife for these 14 years, even though she does not write him back. He's writing letters to Sally. She never writes him. Even though he's sort of falling in love with this woman, Kathy, in New Orleans, but they have a flirtatious but platonic relationship because he sees himself as bound and loyal. So he and Kathy end up joining Sarah's banner, right? Sarah sort of metaphorically raising her flag is a watershed moment for Bill, because I've got direction again, so he becomes the general of her forces in Cahokia. Now, Kathy is also an exile from the Chesapeake, and her backstory is, you get hints of it in the first 3 books, but it comes out here in book 4. But if you, so I will tell a little bit of spoilers here. Bill, while he's in exile, thinks about his wife, and he has daughters, but especially thinks about his son, and his son Charles. And he thinks about, Charles is old enough; he's got his commission by now. I'm sure he's a fighting man, and he imagines this, and those things actually turn out to be true of his son. Charles is a good guy. He's a noble. In the service of the Earl of Johnsland. I think he's a lieutenant. I can't remember. He's an officer, a cavalryman. But what happens in book 2 is he's killed. He's killed because of he's killed in sort of an act of fear that's really precipitated by the very hierarchical relationship of these sort of young men around the Earl of Johnsland, where George is the heir, and then you've got and the only surviving legitimate son of the Earl, and then you've got these foundling children who have names like Chapel or Temple to indicate, we don't know their father, but they're being raised as part of the Earl's household. And one of those is Nathaniel, who is the boy that Bill hid, who was Sarah's brother. And that's why we sort of see into this conflict. And the other one is a guy named Landon Chapel, who is understood to be one of the Earl's bastards. But George just takes it out of Landon, who in turn turns around and really takes it out of Nathaniel. And there's just this blood, like chickens, they're bloody pecking on each other in a strict order. And after an episode in which Landon really abuses Nathaniel, Charles, who is a bit outside of that pecking order, because he's really an adult and he's got his commission, steps in rage to confront Landon, and Landon kills him on the spot, shoots him in the head. So Bill's son, whom he idolizes enormously, has been killed. You would say manslaughter, not premeditated murder, right? But in a moment of real fear and stress by this guy Landon Chapel, who then at the end of book 3 shows up after Nathaniel has healed the Earl. And as I'm saying all this stuff, man, a lot of things has happened in these books. After Nathaniel has healed the Earl, Landon and a small corps of riders come to Cahokia to be, part of its defenses and represent this ally. Well, it turns out that Landon Chapel is the son of the Earl and Kathy, and the reason that she had to leave is because she had the Earl's illegitimate son, and so the son was taken into the Earl's care. She was hooked up into a sort of forced shotgun marriage with a local teacher and sent west to just get out of the earldom and be out of sight.
All right, so Kathy is at this point. Bill and Kathy are in love, and they're going to get married. And Bill has reached the point where he's let go of that old thing.
Yep.
And Landon is sort of a protege because he's And so you got a real sort of Sophoclean even thing here, because this is the guy that killed his son, although he doesn't know it yet. And this plays out.
And it plays out, and it's
a cool part of the book. Well, tell us about the other pens as well, because they all come in. I really like your Catalan pirate also, and Margaret's hanging with her, right?
So and let me not forget Calvin too. I want to say
yes, and Calvin. So let's go to Calvin. Calvin grew up with Sarah. He is Andy Calhoun's son,
grandson,
and Andy's been done away with badly.
Andy gets killed. Andy gets killed in this book, badly. So we see there's sort of for Calvin. Yeah. So Calvin's he's very proud.
This was and his father. He grew up with Sarah, our heroine, and she was hidden with his father. That's where she was during her growing up times.
So he
in Tennessee mountains.
Her, and then but that's not cool. You can't be in love with your cousin. And then suddenly it became okay because she wasn't really his blood kin. He was the elector sent him to kind of watch her on the road. And that's sort of the beginning of a series of steps for Calvin in his ascent into sort of becoming a leader of men. So he successfully, accompanies Sarah to Cahokia, gets her onto the throne, has a rupture at the end of book 2, and so, which sends him he kills someone on the serpent throne before, which is an act of great sacrilege. He does it for Sarah. He does it in a heated moment. It's not planned. And yet, when Sarah makes contact at the end of book 2 with her goddess for the first time, he can't be there. He's excluded. So his heart's broken, and he leaves. So in book 3, we see him starting to engineer the impeachment of Thomas Penn. And that continues into book 4 until Iron Andy is murdered in a trick which is intended to kill Calvin as well. And so then I got to write the sort of the leadership contest scenes that I had a lot of fun with, where Cal, having had all these experiences, now steps up and says, well, we need a new elector. Someone needs to be the head of the Calhoun family, and kind of what he does to become that man, which I had a lot of fun writing. So the other 2 siblings are a lot of fun. These, by the way, these characters are all actually rooted in my own children. I've got a daughter with eyes of 2 different color, and actually the phrase "witchy eye" is something I started calling her when she was about 8 weeks old, and we first noticed this. So
really, I haven't heard you say that before. That's cool.
Oh yeah, and my son.
What's her name?
Her name is Callie, actually. My son William, in utero, had his head pressed up against one wall of the womb, and his ear was pinned flat. So when he was born, he had one ear like this, and it slowly came out. And if you look at him, he's got one ear flat against his head and one ear that sticks out nearly perpendicular. And then my third child it's a recessive trait in my wife's family. The rest of us have more or less straight hair, little curl, whatever. But she has like real, like white girl fro hair. And so they.
I think I've seen her. I've met her, I believe.
Yeah, I think you have.
Anyway, I met one of them of the brood. So, yeah. So Nathaniel has been raised in John's Land. Nathaniel has been tormented by voices all his life through his witchy ear, which in my initial pitch, I think I even called book 2 Witchy Ear, but that's not a very good title, so I changed it. So Nathaniel, he's sort of thought of as maybe being mad or tormented, but
But in book 2, he is healed in the traditional shamanic route, which is that he ascends into the sky. He is remade by being torn to pieces by cosmic ogres and rebuilt with iron bones. And he comes back with various taboos. He wears his hat backwards and his coat inside out. He can't ride horses. He can't use a blade.
And he has to do these things. It's not just like a quirk. It's how his magic works.
How his magic, he can't choose otherwise. Yeah, and but he also gains the ability to travel in great distances. He can travel across the spirit plane. He can see the essential reality of things and interact them, which allows him to heal people. It also means he can sort of be in 2 places at one time because he can inhabit physical bodies and do limited of unconscious people and do limited things with them. And when he is in he sees it as a big grassy plain under a starlit sky that's always night. A shadowy bear, which is in some sense another aspect of him, appears and guards his body. So we sort of see the recovery of him in book 2. Book 3, Margaret is also kind of brought into the fold, the third child, and she was hidden with a Catalan pirate and smuggler named Montserrat Ferrer Quintana, and Montse is fierce and a pretty flamboyant lesbian, and as one of the sort of pieces that's I don't want to overstate how much this is a part of the book, but apparently she was more than just a friend to Hannah Penn, and so we get some hints of like some tensions and some unusual elements in the relationship with Sarah's parents. But she
aside from just eating acorns to become pregnant, but
yeah,
anyway.
that one thing. So Monse, like Bill, is as a character, and she has when we meet her in book do we meet her book 2? The book 3, basically. No, we meet her in book 2. That's right. So we see her a little bit, her and Margaret, who all 3 of these children are raised without awareness of their inheritance. All 3 have a sort of a curse that is also connected with kind of a blessing or a superpower. Margaret is the Incredible Hulk, or in an idiom she would recognize, she's sort of Samson. When she gets her dander up, when she is angry and hurt and scared enough, including marginally to losing control, although it's not quite like the Hulk. She does not become an animal. Her hair stands up, and she becomes very physically strong and impervious to physical harm, or as far as we can tell, impervious. We see this first at the beginning of book 2, not the beginning, but the end of book 2, where she basically sinks the ship she's on. She's been separated from Montse and is being taken to be traded among the powers of the empire as a bargaining chip. And she breaks out and wrecks the ship. So in book 3, Nathaniel goes and another character, Jakob Hope, and frees Margaret from her captors. A couple of the sort of plots that involve them are the subplots in book 4 here. Nathaniel has realized his powers only really work for him. He is really a healer. If he tries to do other things, if he tries to act like a spy, or if he tries to use his abilities to inflict harm, he feels ill and weak and he loses powers. He is a healer, and he decides, the thing I really should do is go heal my uncle Thomas Penn. He's he's the source. This is the side of the conflict that Nathaniel is seeing much more than the Simon Sword side. And so we see over several attempts, Nathaniel and his sister kind of going in and trying to get closer to Thomas to, in Nathaniel's paradigm, his vocabulary, to heal him, to relieve him of whatever the burden is that's making him do these horrible things, his desire to kill us, for one thing. So that's kind of a plot thread. On a subplot level, one of the things that happens is there's a break between Margaret and Nathaniel as a result, because she starts to feel used. I'm just like the bear. All I do is protect you while you go do everything. And that's not entirely fair, but it's not entirely unfair either. And so that's part of the tension in book 4.
Yeah, I mean, this is just, we could go on and on, because this is this vast tapestry you've created of it's beautiful, vast tapestry, magic filled. I just sort of, if I was picturing it, it would be this tapestry that's twinkling with all the threads you've run through it, and all centered on our main character, who is the queen of this place in the center of North America, who's troubled by enemies without and enemies within, who's fighting it all, and has this huge fighting deep spirit that allows her to keep going. It's a great book. Serpent Daughter is, I mean, this is where she's queen, and this is the place you could easily come into the series and find her. What else can we say about it? We've covered a lot.
We've covered a lot. Yeah.
What are you working on now?
Well, so 2 things. One, I have written on spec a novel which I will send to you guys and hope that you like it soon. Soon probably is not earlier than December, but it is it's not entirely on spec in that I've discussed it with Tony W. a couple of times, so it won't be like a complete out of the blue surprise. But it's a sort of a science fiction story. I don't know what assortive means. It's a science fiction novel with a backdrop that is modeled on the East India Company. So if you read the history of Britain's East India Company, and there's different perspectives on it, but there's a fundamental conflict or problem, which is, Britain gave a commercial enterprise the right to behave like a state. It gave it a monopoly on violence, and that led to some without having the sort of democratic or other constitutional checks. And that led to some real problems. So the setting here is something like early 23rd century, and we've been at space for a while, and we're a few systems we're operating, but in particular, it turns out there's a black hole around the planet Jupiter that can only be opened with the application of power. So it's expensive to go through it, and it gets to a system that's something like 40 light years away from Earth, where there are several habitable worlds. And the US federal government charters a corporation and basically gives them control over this gate, right? And effectively, therefore, control over that system. And so the story's about an accountant this is his first job right out of school. He's in debt from school. He married young. He's got 2 kids, so he's leveraged in sort of every possible sense. And he got this very exciting opportunity, his first job, which is to go be an accountant for the Sarovar company and Sarovar system. And he gets there and pretty quickly starts to see that it's not just Sarovari goods that are bottlenecked by the wormhole. It's also information, and actually the company is pretty rapacious and pretty corrupt, and he's put in this position of having to try to make a living without losing his soul, and he's caught between sort of some corrupt traders who are running guns and two different groups of natives. There's some human settlers who preceded the grant to the company and are still on the ground, and there are some native species, and trying to find peaceful solutions. It's about a guy who's not a fighter. He's a trader and an accountant, and in a ray guns and aliens kind of world.
Cool. Well, so, all right, early British Empire in space, early East India Company. Sounds very cool. We'll look forward to that. But out now at booksellers everywhere is Serpent Daughter, a very different book, a historical fantasy, vast tapestry of magic and wonder by DJ Butler. Dave, thank you so much for talking with us about Serpent Daughter.
Hey, thanks, Tony. Had a great time.
That was part 2 of a 2-part interview with DJ Butler talking about Serpent Daughter. Part 1 is available on last week's podcast. Here is another entry in David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Honor keeps her promise. The Solarian League. For hundreds of years they have borne the banner of human civilization. But the bureaucratic mandarins who rule today's League are corrupt and looking for scapegoats. They've decided the upstart Star Kingdom of Manticore must be annihilated. Uncompromising courage. Honor Harrington has worn the Star Kingdom's uniform for half a century. Very few know war the way Honor Harrington does. So far, hers has been a voice of caution. But now the Mandarins have committed atrocities such as the galaxy has not known in 1,000 years. They have finally killed too many of the people Honor Harrington loves. Uncompromising vengeance. Now Honor Harrington is coming for the Solarian League, and hell is riding in her wake. And now, David Weber's Uncompromising Honor.
System Defense HQ. City of Columbia, Beowulf System.
Sir, they've altered course, Dunstan Myers announced sharply. They're breaking off their run on Cassandra, and they've increased acceleration to 468 gravities.
I see it, Cheryl. McAvoy crossed the huge dimly lit chamber to stand beside the ops officer, watching vectors shift and flow as Ghost Rider reported the Solly's changing heading, and he frowned as he wondered what the hell they were up to now. Their initial velocity of 600 kps towards Cassandra had increased to 12,236 kps since their arrival. That meant that at their initial acceleration, it would have taken them 48 minutes just to decelerate to 0 and start back the way they'd come. But that wasn't what they were doing. They'd turned directly out system instead, at right angles to their current vector, and they'd started their run from so far out that they were still barely 6 million kilometers inside the limit. With that acceleration, bending their vector that sharply, they could be back across the wall in barely 27 minutes. And if all they're really doing is running the hell away, that's fine, he thought. Maybe this is a panic reaction. Maybe they didn't expect to see Apollo coming at them at all, and now that it has, they're headed for the high timber. But it's hard to imagine they could have been that stupid. They had to realize we'd deploy MDMs to cover our critical star systems. The acceleration change does suggest they've just cut loose whatever pods they were towing, though, and they haven't launched a damn thing back at us, which sure looks like a panic reaction, plain and simple. If I were them, and if I didn't care any more about civilian casualties than whatever bastard came up with Buccaneer and Parthian shot, I'd have launched everything I had before I turned away on the theory that even inaccurate birds had to be more effective than birds that were never launched at all. But they didn't do that. Or at least it sure looks like they just jettisoned their pods without even trying to launch. Does that mean they've decided Parthian shot was a bad idea? That could make sense after what happened in Mesa, if they want to try to convince people they hold the moral high ground. But it also suggests they really thought they could get close enough to Cassandra to target their fire accurately. So does that mean Hamish was right? Were they as surprised as we were by what happened to Mycroft? Or were they really dumb enough to not anticipate system defense MDMs at all? Or did they... He shook himself. There was no way in hell he could answer any of those questions. All he could do now was wait and hope the POWs could answer them for him later. SLNS Quebec. Task Force 790, Beowulf System. We have a second launch, sir, Liang Tao Rutger said quietly, and Vincent Capriotti looked across at him, then checked the time. 14 minutes had passed since the Defender's first launch, and he smiled in ironic amusement. The first launch had gone ballistic 6 minutes and 65,766,900 kilometers after launch. That sounded a hell of a lot like 2 separate drives with pretty close to standard endurance, which confirmed quite a lot of speculation back home. No one had any notion yet how it might be done, but it certainly sounded like the Manties had managed to graft separate sets of impeller nodes into the same missile body without their eating each other before they were successfully brought online. Assuming that was what was actually happening, and if the missiles packed in a third stage with identical performance, they should resume their acceleration in roughly 3 more minutes and arrive 3 minutes after that, just over 19 minutes after launch. At least now I know how big an interval they figure their FTL systems can handle without the dispersed platforms, he thought almost whimsically. If they could have closed that interval any, they damned well would have done it. CIC makes it another 5,000, sir. Very impressive, Capriotti replied. On the other hand, we'll be across the limit and gone by the time they can reach us. I'm sure they can figure that out for themselves, so this is probably intended to encourage us to keep moving right along, and to pick off any cripples, I suppose. But in the meantime... He looked at another display. Beowulf System. 19,913,317 kilometers from Beowulf orbit. The Astas had been launched 57 minutes earlier. They'd started their journey at an acceleration of a mere 15,000 kps squared, barely a crawl compared to the 46,000 kps squared a Mark 23 turned out at even its lowest acceleration bracket. On the other hand, they were far, far stealthier than any MDM ever built. In fact, they were no more than the mating of a slightly modified Explorator recon drone with a Cataphract C second stage. They retained all of the Explorator's original stealthiness, and their acceleration rates had been stepped down a bit further to make them even harder to detect. The result was something that was almost impossible to detect, even under acceleration, at ranges lower than 70 to 80 light seconds. Once it went ballistic, it was effectively invisible even to active sensors at anything above 500,000 kilometers, and Operation Fabius had taken steps to make them even harder to spot by sending a host of regular reconnaissance drones ahead of them, with an acceleration rate 30% higher than theirs, programmed to spread out and chatter back and forth. No one on the other side had noticed that the talkative recon drone stealth systems were working at no more than 80% of normal efficiency, and no one had suspected that their sole purpose was to attract any sensor systems to their impeller wedges, rather than the weaker, stealthier ones coming along behind. Nor had anyone on the other side realized Vincent Capriotti's battlecruisers hadn't been towing cataphracts when they crossed the hyperlimit. All their towing capacity had been devoted to the Astas, and their relatively low acceleration rate after the Astas launched had been designed solely to convince the system's defenders they were towing heavy cataphract loads for the attack on Cassandra they had absolutely no intention of making. The last thing TF-790 had wanted Skywatch or System Defense HQ to realize was that it had never intended to penetrate more than 4,500,000 kilometers inside the limit before turning and braking for the safety of the alpha bands at 90% of maximum power. Vincent Capriotti had nourished his private doubts about the elaborate deception plan, but it had worked almost perfectly. It wouldn't have been enough to save TF-790 from Mycroft without the unexpected assistance of Silver Bullet. For that matter, it might turn out that it still wasn't enough. The ops plan had worked to get all the bits and pieces to where they needed to be at the critical moments, however, and there was a certain irony in that. If the Mason alignment had realized that would happen, they wouldn't have needed to reveal Silver Bullet's existence. or suggest their direct involvement in Fabius. Unfortunately, Benjamin Detweiler and his planners hadn't known how the original Fabius plans would be modified once Winston Kingsford realized what Asta could do, and so they'd expected the attackers to require all the help they could get on their run into the target. And the knowledge that there had been no way to hide their involvement, whatever happened, at least from the Grand Alliance, had made it even easier for Benjamin and his brothers to decide to tweak the original operations plan. The impeller endurance of the interference-running recon drones was measured in hours, even in days if it was husbanded properly. Asta's endurance was barely 10 minutes. At the end of that brief interval, its impellers went down forever, and it sliced onward through the void at a constant velocity of 88,260 kps, as invisible as the vacuum about it. But now, AIs aboard that shoal of invisible assassins noted that the time had almost come. They checked their targeting criteria and instructions against the take from their own sensors. Not nearly so good as irregular recon drones, but far better than any previous generation of Solarian missile even the improved cataphracts had ever mounted. A few corrections were necessary, and they made them. Then they began the prep cycle.
That was another entry in the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Uncompromising Honor. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com and to podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. And the beautiful, smoldering, golden-laden remains of the U.S. National Bank shut down with Jacksonian fury and aplomb, plus thanks and praise to DJ Butler, author of Serpent Daughter. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.
Having taken her father's throne, Sarah Calhoun has fallen out with one of her best allies, and her brother Nathaniel heads into Imperial Philadelphia with a reckless plan. Her uncle Thomas, armed with new powers and new allies, aims to remove Sarah from her throne and from the world of the living. To survive, and to gain the strength she needs to fight an impossible war, Sarah must unite the Mound Builder Kings to enact an ancient rite that will propel her beyond mortality. Serpent Daughter by DJ Butler is the newest entry in the Dragon Award-winning Witchy Wars series from Baen Books at baenbooks.com.